She was dead. That call shattered everything. Olivia, my sister, was gone. Or so I thought. What I found will haunt me forever. It all started innocently enough, at least, that's how I convinced myself at the time. My sister, Olivia, had always been the one who needed a little extra help. Growing up without a father, and with a mother who was distant at best, it was just the two of us. And for the most part, I was fine with that. Sure, it wasn't ideal. We didn't have the support of a large family, but we had each other. Or so I thought. I was the older brother, 5 years ahead of Olivia, and I guess that meant I had a natural inclination to take care of her. She was my little sister, after all. She didn't always know what she wanted, but I did. She never understood the value of things, but I did. So when she got into a good college and needed help with her tuition, I didn't hesitate. I wasn't rich by any means, but I had a decent job as a software engineer, and I'd been saving up for a rainy day. I saw it as my responsibility, a way to make sure she had the chance I never did. The chance to succeed. I paid for her tuition, her rent, her groceries, everything. I didn't even blink. I told myself it was worth it, that helping her would somehow make up for the lack of family support we'd always had. That maybe, just maybe, one day she'd appreciate it. Maybe she'd finally see me as the person who was there for her when no one else was. But somewhere along the way, things started to change. I noticed it first in the way she spoke to me, the small comments that became more frequent, more biting. She would scoff when I tried to offer advice, telling me to mind my own business. And when I'd ask how things were going in school, she would snap, "I don't need your help anymore. I'm fine." The first time she called me worthless was like a punch to the gut. It was a Saturday night. I had just returned from a long week of work, eager to unwind, when she called. Her voice was cold, dismissive. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you? Just because you can afford to pay for everything doesn't mean I'm grateful. You're just a pathetic little man who thinks his money makes him important." Well, newsflash, it doesn't. I was stunned. I didn't know how to respond. She had never spoken to me like that before. I had been doing everything for her, sacrificing my own comfort so she could get a better start in life. And this was how she repaid me? With words that cut deeper than any knife. But I didn't say anything. I just sat there, staring at the phone, wondering what had gone so wrong. Maybe it was just a phase. Maybe she was stressed about school. So, I brushed it off. But it didn't stop there. The next few months, things only got worse. Every conversation felt like an argument waiting to happen. She'd accuse me of being controlling, of buying her love with the money I sent. Every time I offered to help, she'd tell me to back off, that she could handle things herself. But when she needed something, it was always me she turned to. It was exhausting, and I began to feel like I was drowning in her resentment. Finally, the day came when I snapped. I had been paying for her apartment, her food, her school fees, and I realized I had nothing left for myself. I had been so caught up in helping her that I had neglected my own dreams, my own future. I decided it was time to stop. It was time to let her sink or swim on her own. I cut off the financial support. I stopped answering her calls for a week, hoping she'd figure things out. When I finally heard from her, it was a text: "You're a selfish bastard. You always act like you're better than me, but you're just a pathetic loser who can't see past your own ego." That was it. That was the breaking point. I blocked her number. I needed space, I needed time away from the person who had once been my closest companion. I couldn't keep being the one who was always there, always offering a hand when she didn't even care to hold it. Months passed, and I thought I was finally free. I focused on my career, on my life. But the silence between us was deafening. It was a quiet loneliness, one I didn't know I would ever have to endure. Then came the knock on my door. I didn't recognize the sound at first. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. But there it was again, a firm knock, followed by a tentative pause. I opened the door, and there she was. Olivia, standing there with her head lowered, a look of guilt painted on her face. She looked different, disheveled, almost unrecognizable. The girl who once had it all together was now a stranger. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been an idiot. I don't know what I was thinking." I didn't invite her inside. I just stood there in the doorway, watching her, unsure of what to say. For years had passed since we last spoke, but in those years, I had learned more than I ever wanted to about family, about what it meant to truly help someone. "What do you want, Olivia?" I asked, the bitterness creeping into my voice despite my attempt to remain calm. She looked up at me then, her eyes red and swollen, and I saw the truth in them. She had lost everything, her friends, her job, her self-respect. She was broken, a shell of the woman she had once been. I I lost everything, she admitted, choking back tears. I thought I could do it on my own, but I couldn't. I didn't realize what you did for me until it was too late. And now I'm nothing. I didn't know how to feel. I wanted to be angry with her. I wanted to yell at her, to tell her how much she had hurt me, how she had thrown everything away. But instead, I felt pity. Pity for the woman she had become. You're right, I said quietly. You're nothing. You were nothing when you left me in the dust. You never cared. You used me. Her face crumpled, and I saw the weight of her mistakes crashing down on her. And for the first time in years, I felt something resembling empathy for her. Please, just help me, she begged. I don't know where else to turn. And in that moment, I realized something. She was still my sister. She was still family, no matter how much she had hurt me. As much as I hated myself for it, my conscience prevailed. I couldn't leave her to spiral further. Fine, I said, stepping aside to let her in. I'll help you. But this is the last time. You have to change. If you don't, I'll walk away for good. She nodded, her face a mixture of gratitude and regret. What came next, however, was more than I could have ever anticipated. I let her in, but only just. The moment she crossed the threshold, I felt the weight of my decision settle on my shoulders. She had been my sister, my responsibility, and now she was a reminder of everything I had been trying to leave behind. I didn't know if helping her was out of duty or misplaced guilt, but I pushed the thoughts aside. She was here now, and for better or worse, I would try to help her. But it was going to be difficult. Over the next few weeks, I watched her struggle. She wasn't the same person I remembered. She looked older, frail, almost sickly. She had spent the last few years running from herself, from everything she had once held dear. Her friends had turned their backs on her, her social media accounts were now silent, and she had burned every bridge she could. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was the look in her eyes, vacant, like a person who had given up. She spent the first few days at my apartment, barely saying a word. I put her in touch with a few contacts, helped her look for jobs, and took her to some interviews. But every time we drove to one, she seemed to shrink further. She didn't smile, didn't make an effort to show any enthusiasm. It was like she was resigned to the fact that nothing was going to work out. I tried to be patient, but I couldn't deny how much her presence affected me. She had once been so full of life, so vibrant, but now she was just a shadow. She couldn't handle the job I was offering her, and she decided that she couldn't. I offered her good money to start her life from scratch. She was very happy and grateful for my help and promised me that the money would not go to waste. 5 months have passed. It was a cold morning when I got the phone call. The one that would change everything. It was from an old friend of hers, someone I barely knew but who had once been a big part of her life. They had stayed in touch off and on, but I hadn't heard from him in years. His voice was shakier than I remembered, and there was a sense of urgency in his words. Jake, it's about Olivia, he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. She's not doing well. She's been spiraling for months, and I don't know how to help her anymore. She's in trouble. My heart sank. What happened? It's bad, man. She's mixed up in some things she shouldn't be, and now. I'm sorry, but she's gone. She's overdosed. She's in the hospital. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. I felt like I was drowning, my mind racing, trying to process the words that had just hit me like a freight train. Olivia, my sister, had overdosed. It was the last thing I had expected to hear, yet in the pit of my stomach, I had known it was coming. I grabbed my coat and rushed to the hospital, my heart pounding in my chest. The world felt like it was spinning, and everything around me seemed muffled, as if I were underwater. I arrived at the hospital, disoriented, and tried to find the right department. I was shaking as I approached the receptionist, my hands trembling as I gave her Olivia's name. She's in critical condition, the receptionist said, her voice clinical, detached. Room 402. I didn't need any more information. I just started running. My legs were heavy, but I pushed forward, determined to get to her. The long corridor felt endless, but finally, I reached the door. I didn't know what I was expecting to see, but when I stepped inside, I was unprepared for the sight of my sister. She was lying there, unconscious, tubes running into her arm. Her skin was pale, her face gaunt. She didn't look like the Olivia I once knew. She looked like someone who had been swallowed by the world, consumed by whatever demon she had been running from. A nurse looked up at me as I stood frozen in the doorway. She's stable for now, the nurse said softly, as if it was any consolation. But you should be prepared. She's been through a lot. I didn't know what to say. What was there to say? The sister I had once adored, the one I had tried to help, was now lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life. I sat in the chair next to her bed, my hands gripping the armrests as I watched her sleep. A part of me wanted to blame her for everything. The pain she had caused me, the way she had treated me, and how she had driven me away. But as I sat there, looking at her pale face, I felt nothing but pity. She had lost everything. And now, she was paying the price for it. It was then that I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. Olivia wasn't just my sister, she was a reflection of everything I had been too afraid to face. She was a mirror, showing me the consequences of selfishness, of letting my own desires take precedence over the people I loved. And maybe, just maybe, this was my chance to make it right. But as much as I wanted to help her, I knew the road ahead would be long, and it would be harder than I could imagine. The days that followed Olivia's hospitalization were a blur. I stayed at her side as much as I could, watching her fade in and out of consciousness. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but I could tell that her situation was dire. Her body had been ravaged by the drugs, her spirit had been crushed by whatever had driven her down this path. The once vibrant, ambitious woman who had the world at her feet was now nothing more than a broken shell. I stayed with her for hours every day, my emotions fluctuating wildly. I was angry at her for doing this to herself, angry at myself for enabling her in the first place. But there was also a deep sense of responsibility. She was my sister. No matter what had happened, no matter the cruelty and the insults she'd hurled at me, I couldn't just walk away from her. Not now. After 5 long days, Olivia finally woke up. She looked around, her eyes unfocused, as if she couldn't quite place where she was. When her gaze finally landed on me, she looked shocked, like she had expected to see someone else. "Jake," she croaked, her voice raw from disuse. "What are you doing here?" I swallowed hard, trying to push down the knot in my throat. "I'm here because you're my sister. And I'm not going anywhere." She closed her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might drift back to sleep. But then she opened them again, locking eyes with me. The look in her eyes was one I hadn't seen in years, vulnerable, broken, almost childlike. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I don't know what I was thinking. I messed up so badly. I was so selfish." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. "You've been selfish, Olivia. You've pushed everyone away. You hurt me, you hurt yourself, you've been destroying everything you built. But you're still here. And that means there's a chance for you to fix things." She let out a small laugh, though it was bitter. "Do you really think I can fix this? Do you think I can fix myself?" I didn't have an answer for her. I wanted to believe that people could change, that she could change, but I wasn't sure. Her entire life had been one long string of bad decisions, and now she was paying the price for it. But I wasn't going to turn my back on her. Not yet. "I don't know," I said softly. "But I'll help you. If you want it, I'll help you get back on your feet." For a moment, she looked like she might argue, like she might tell me to stop, to leave her alone. But then, as if the weight of it all finally hit her, she broke down in front of me. She sobbed uncontrollably, the tears streaming down her face as she buried her head in her pillow. It was the first time in years that I had seen her truly vulnerable, truly human. "I don't know how to fix this, Jake," she cried. "I don't know how to fix myself. Step by step," I replied quietly. "One step at a time." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of doctor's appointments, rehab visits, and late-night talks. Olivia was determined to turn her life around, but I could see the struggle in her eyes every time she looked in the mirror. Her addiction had become a part of her, something that would take years to unlearn. But she was trying. And for the first time in a long while, I could see a glimmer of hope in her. But as she fought to reclaim her life, tragedy struck. Olivia's ex-boyfriend, the one who had played a significant part in her downward spiral, was found dead. It was a freak accident. He had been in a car crash, the kind of thing that felt like a bad dream. I was stunned when I heard the news, but for Olivia, it hit her like a freight train. She took it harder than I expected. They had ended things badly, and while she had moved on in her own way, the sudden loss of someone who had once been such a big part of her life seemed to shatter something in her. It was as if the last piece of her support system had been ripped away, and she was left, once again, to face the world alone. The day after his death, Olivia came to me, her face pale and her hands shaking. "Jake, I can't do this," she said, her voice full of fear and regret. "I messed up so much. He was the one person who ever understood me, even if he was toxic. I took him for granted, and now he's gone. And I don't know what to do with myself." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "Olivia, you don't have to carry this alone. We've all made mistakes. We all have things we wish we could undo. But the only thing you can do now is keep moving forward. You owe it to yourself to keep fighting. She shook her head, her tears falling freely. I can't move on, Jake. I don't know how. You're not alone, I said, my voice steady, but inside, I was breaking for her. You have me. And you have your own strength. You can do this. But even as I said those words, I wasn't sure if I believed them. The truth was, I didn't know if she could change. I didn't know if anyone could come back from the hole she had dug herself into. 4 years passed. In that time, Olivia did everything she could to put her life back together. I helped her find a job, a small apartment, and the courage to face each new day. She wasn't perfect, she still had her demons, still struggled with addiction, and still had the scars from her past. But she was alive. And that, I had to remind myself, was the most important thing. But one evening, I received a call that I never expected. It was her Olivia, but this time, she sounded different. Her voice was ragged, full of panic, as if she was calling from the edge of some abyss. Jake, I'm lost. I don't know what to do anymore. I've fallen so far, and I don't think I can come back this time. I'm not the person I used to be. I could hear the tremor in her voice, the fear, the desperation. The words she spoke were those of someone who had given up, who had reached the end of the road. And just like that, I realized something. This was it. This was the moment where I had to make the decision to walk away, or to help her again. It wasn't easy, answering the call from Olivia that night. I had spent so many years helping her, so many nights lying awake, wondering if she'd ever change, if she'd ever come to realize the pain she had caused, both to me and to herself. But as I listened to her on the other end of the line, I knew this wasn't just another cry for attention. She sounded broken, and for the first time in years, I could hear the fear in her voice that she might truly be beyond saving. I'd helped her before, but I didn't know if I could keep doing it. Part of me was tired, exhausted from the emotional toll. But another part of me, the part that still cared about her, the part that still saw the sister I once knew, wanted to reach out. I grabbed my keys and went to the address she gave me. I didn't know what I'd find when I arrived, but I knew I couldn't leave her to face this alone. When I knocked on her door, there was no answer at first. I knocked again, louder this time, and heard a faint shuffling from inside. Then the door creaked open, and there she was, Olivia, but she wasn't the Olivia I knew. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face pale, her clothes wrinkled and disheveled. Jake, she said, her voice shaky, barely audible. I didn't know who else to call. I stepped inside, taking in the mess around her. The apartment looked like it hadn't been cleaned in weeks. The air smelled stale, like the weight of depression had settled into every corner. But it wasn't the state of the apartment that struck me most, it was Olivia herself. She had always been so confident, so sure of herself. But now, she was a shadow of that person. It was like she had surrendered to everything that had once held her captive. I don't know what to do anymore, she whispered, sitting on the couch. I've tried, Jake. I've tried so hard. But every time I think I'm getting better, I fall back into it. Into the drugs, into the lies. And I don't know how to stop. I sat next to her, my heart aching for the sister who had once been the most important person in my life. Olivia, you've come a long way, I said softly, my voice steady. But this isn't just about getting better overnight. It's going to take time. You're not going to fix everything in a week or a month. But you can start. You can start by asking for help. I don't know if I can do it anymore, she said, shaking her head. I don't know if I can go on like this. I put my hand on her shoulder, offering her a sense of calm, something to hold on to. You don't have to do it alone. I'm here. And I'll help you get through this. She looked at me then, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. But what if I fail again? What if I disappoint you? Olivia, I said firmly, I've been there for you every step of the way, and I will continue to be there. No matter what. But you have to want to change. You have to be willing to take the first step, even if it's hard. She stared at me for a long time, her breath shaky. Then, slowly, she nodded. I'll try, she whispered. I'll try. Over the next few weeks, things started to change, slowly. Olivia entered a rehab program, something that had been long overdue. I helped her with the paperwork, with finding a therapist, with everything she needed to get back on her feet. It wasn't easy. There were days when she struggled, days when she wanted to give up. But she kept fighting. And so did I. The hardest part came a month into her recovery when we received the news about the death of one of her close friends, Sarah. I'd never met Sarah, but from what Olivia had told me, she had been a major influence in her life. Sarah was the one who had been there for Olivia in her darkest moments, the one who had helped her through some of her toughest battles. And now, she was gone. It was a shock, a punch to the gut that neither of us expected. Olivia was devastated, and I had no idea how to help her through the grief. It felt like everything she had been working toward, everything she had fought for, was suddenly in jeopardy. I was afraid she'd relapse, that the weight of Sarah's death would send her spiraling once more. But instead of falling apart, Olivia surprised me. She was crushed, yes, but she didn't crumble. She went to Sarah's funeral, stood by her friends and family, and somehow found the strength to carry on. I realized, then, that Olivia was no longer the girl I had once known. She was someone new, someone who had learned to endure, someone who had learned to fight. As months passed, Olivia's life began to stabilize. She found a job at a local coffee shop, something simple but fulfilling. She rented a small apartment near the shop and started rebuilding her life, piece by piece. She even managed to reconnect with a few of her old friends, people she had pushed away during her worst times. And one day, I got a call from her that I never expected. "Jake," she said, her voice shaky, but this time not with fear. "I've been thinking. I've been so selfish, so caught up in my own mess. I hurt you, I hurt myself, and I thought I'd never be able to make up for it. But I want to say thank you. For everything. For not giving up on me." I let the words sink in, the weight of them heavy in my chest. "You don't have to thank me, Olivia. I'm your brother. I'll always be here." "No," she replied, her voice breaking, "you don't understand. You were the only one who didn't leave me. You were the only one who saw through my bullshit. And I don't deserve it, but you did it anyway. You helped me. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to make up for it, but I'll try. I promise." The sincerity in her voice was overwhelming. And in that moment, I realized something. As much as Olivia had hurt me, as much as I had wanted to cut her out of my life forever, she was still my sister. And maybe, just maybe, she was finally on the path to becoming the person I had always known she could be. The years had been long, and the road had been rocky, but maybe, just maybe, we could start over. Together.